Ukraine just pulled off one of its most devastating and precise drone assaults yet, striking right at the heart of Russia's military power and essentially wiping a military stronghold from the map. The target? Engels Air Base in the Saratov region of Russia, a vital hub for the Putin war machine. Now, that base is now smouldering after Ukraine struck with a horde of drones, potentially taking out some of Russia's most important bombers in the process. On March 20, ABC News was among the first to report on Ukraine's massive drone strike, confirming that Russian authorities from the Saratov Oblast had acknowledged a Ukrainian attack. The target, according to those authorities, was Engels Air Base. Located approximately 280 miles from Russia's border with Ukraine, the base lies deep in Russia's territory, which has made it vital for Putin throughout the war as a launchpad for his bombers and fighter jets. But now, that crucial piece of Russia's military strategy has been hit hard, and the fallout could change everything. Ukraine has long known just how dangerous this base is. ABC reports that Ukraine has struck the base multiple times over the last 3 years, with its most recent attack coming earlier this year. Reuters reported that the January 2025 strike targeted an oil depot serving the Engels base, setting it ablaze. That was an effective attack by Ukraine. Saratov's regional governor, Roman Busagin, told reporters that 2 Russian firefighters died trying to combat the oil depot blaze. Busagin was also forced to declare a state of emergency in the oblast, which Reuters reports has a population of 200,000 people. The Ukrainian military also lauded that strike, stating on Telegram that it creates serious logistical problems for the strategic aviation of the Russian occupiers and significantly reduces their ability to strike at peaceful Ukrainian cities and civilian objects. If that January strike was impressive, what Ukraine achieved on the night of March 20 was even more so. Details of the attack come from the Kiev Post. It says that Ukraine hit Saratov and Engels with the largest drone strike against the region since Putin invaded Ukraine in February 2022. The attack caused a fire to break out at the Engels Air Base, forcing the evacuation of staff and civilians living in a nearby rural area, according to Roman Busagin. The Astra Telegram channel also revealed images and some video footage of the attack. The pictures seem to show plumes of smoke rising into the sky from the Engels industrial base, suggesting Ukraine achieved several direct hits with its drones. The same goes for a short video, which appears to have been shot by an Engels resident, that shows smoke rising into the air. Astra also reports that secondary detonations could be heard in and around the Engels airbase. Those may have been caused by more drones that impacted valuable Russian assets, or the explosions may have been the result of a direct hit on an ammunition depot at the facility, causing valuable Russian munitions to explode. It appears that Busagin is trying to frame the drone attack as one that targeted civilians ahead of a military target. The Saratov governor claims that Ukraine's Engels strike ended up damaging around 30 homes in the city, along with a school, a hospital, and 2 kindergartens. Local media also shared images of what it claimed to be the hospital, which has shattered windows. Busagin also said that 2 civilians were injured in the attack, one of them being a woman receiving treatment at the hospital. Additionally, the attack hit an oil depot, possibly the same one Ukraine targeted back in January, causing a small blaze. Plus, schools were closed down in the region, with students switching to remote learning for the day. How true these claims are remains to be seen. It's suspicious that Busagin is claiming that Ukraine's strike targeted civilian areas when that's a strategy Russia has used and denied using since the beginning of Putin's invasion. Could Saratov's regional governor be trying to claim that Ukraine is just as guilty of targeting Russia's civilians as Russia is of killing Ukrainian citizens? Possibly. He might also be trying to distract attention away from the true impact Ukraine's strike had against the airbase. Ukraine has just received a new batch of F-16 fighter jets that simultaneously boosts its ability to attack Russia and defend itself from Putin's devastating missile and drone assaults. The arrival of more F-16s means that Ukraine's aerial threat is getting stronger at a time when Putin hoped that his war of attrition would be wearing his enemy down. The first report of the arrival of these F-16s just came through today, March 20, from Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy. Speaking to journalists on March 19, he said that several of the powerful American-made fighter jets had arrived in Ukraine, though he didn't reveal the precise number. Additional F-16s have arrived in Ukraine, Zelenskyy said. The Russians lied that they shot down something there. They didn't shoot anything down. And the good news is that several F-16 aircraft have arrived in Ukraine. Wait, Russians claim to have shot down an F-16? That seems to be the case, according to Zelenskyy and several media reports coming out of Russia. UNN says that Russian military bloggers have started sharing a false report about Putin's forces downing an F-16 over the Sumy region of Ukraine. These bloggers claimed the Ukrainian jet was shot down over an S-400 complex, with the entire incident supposedly being illuminated by Russia's Su-35 fighter jets. Only that doesn't seem to be the case. UNN claims that a Ukrainian Telegram channel named Sunflower, that's run by soldiers of Ukraine's Air Force, debunked Russia's report almost as soon as it came through. S-400, it was close, honestly, noted the channel. But he dodged. Ukrainian Air Force spokesman Yuri Ignat confirmed that the F-16 evaded the Russian S-400, while adding that Ukraine's fighter jets are successfully working on the positions of the occupiers. So, more lies from Putin's camp. And it's no surprise those lies are coming thick and fast. Putin doesn't want to reveal to his people that Ukraine's air force is getting stronger than ever with the arrival of new F-16s. He's claiming Russia has taken out one of Ukraine's jets to make it seem like more being delivered to Ukraine is no big deal. The mighty S-400 anti-air missile system is doing its job, Putin's cronies claim, and Ukraine's F-16s are worthless. That simply isn't the case. The reality is that the March 19 arrival of F-16s is just the latest of several deliveries into Ukraine over the last year. The first batch of the jets arrived in the country in August 2024. More arrived in October, with all of them being jets that the Netherlands pledged to Ukraine months prior. Ukraine took a second delivery of F-16s from the Netherlands in early February 2025. This latest delivery only adds to a growing stockpile of American-made fighter jets Ukraine can use to counter Russia's aerial threat. Ukraine's F-16s are arriving in the country via a coalition of European nations that are working together to reinforce Ukraine's air force. The Netherlands is one of those countries, having pledged 24 F-16s to Ukraine, and with many of them having already arrived in Kiev. Joining the Netherlands is Denmark, which has pledged 19 F-16s, as well as Norway. Norway's numbers are uncertain, with the Kiev Independent saying that they've promised anywhere between 6 and 22 of the fighter jets to Ukraine. Belgium also says it's going to send F-16s to Ukraine, though they haven't disclosed any actual numbers either. The actual numbers may not matter as much as what this coalition of donors symbolizes. Putin is being forced to sit back and watch as his Ukraine invasion unites almost all of Europe against Russia. 4 nations joining together to send F-16s to Ukraine sends a clear message. We don't want Putin to get stronger by absorbing Ukraine. Still, we can't ignore the fact that this latest batch of F-16s is arriving at a perfect time for Ukraine. After the initial chaos of Putin's Ukraine invasion, both the Russian and Ukrainian air forces were left reeling. Russia felt the brunt of the damage. It's lost 369 planes and 331 helicopters, most of which were down during the first months of the war thanks to Putin's faltering aerial tactics. However, Ukraine didn't escape those initial battles unscathed. According to Forbes, in February 2023, Ukraine has already lost many of its fighter jets. It entered the war with around 50 Soviet-era MiG-29s and lost 16 of them by early 2023. It also lost around half of its 24 Sukhoi Su-24 supersonic bombers within the first year of Putin's invasion, along with 15 of its 30 Sukhoi Su-25 aircraft. None of these were particularly impressive fighter jets or bombers, at least by modern standards. They were all relics of the Soviet era, when Ukraine was part of the Russian Federation. Still, losing so many jets put a major dent in Ukraine's desire to establish any sort of air superiority against Russia. It was never going to be able to cover all of Ukraine with these aircraft, as they simply didn't have enough, even before Russia invaded. But losing so many so quickly meant that Ukraine struggled to create even small pockets of aerial dominance to support its ground troops. The March 19 arrival of more F-16s, along with the many that arrived before this most recent delivery, looks set to change all of that.
Not good enough. That was British Prime Minister Keir Starmer's blunt message to Vladimir Putin. After months of brutal fighting, Putin finally offered a partial ceasefire, one that would halt Russian attacks on Ukraine's energy infrastructure but keep the war raging. But the UK isn't buying, because the UK knows the truth. Putin can't be trusted. Instead of backing down, the UK is doubling down, keeping the weapons and aid flowing to Ukraine no matter what the Kremlin demands. So why is the UK rejecting Putin's ceasefire? How is the UK shaping Ukraine's fight for survival? And what does this mean for the future of the war? Let's break it all down. It all started on March 19th. That's when reports began surfacing about the outcome of US President Donald Trump's much-anticipated phone call with Putin. According to Sky News, the call resulted in an agreement between Trump and Putin. There will be no immediate 30-day ceasefire to the war. That was disappointing for Zelenskyy, who'd negotiated the ceasefire terms with Trump mere days earlier. However, there seemed to be a light at the end of the tunnel. Putin said no to a full ceasefire, but he agreed with Trump that Russia would stop attacking Ukraine's energy infrastructure for 30 days. Ukraine mirrored that agreement and a partial ceasefire seemed to be in place. We say seemed because Putin would soon go back on his word, as we'll reveal later in the video. Putin also made further demands during his call with Trump. To have any chance of a full temporary ceasefire, never mind actual peace, Putin wants all of Ukraine's allies to stop sending military aid and intelligence to Zelenskyy's troops. That's as good as Putin saying he wants to demilitarize Ukraine. He knows that without its allies, Ukraine will struggle to hold off Russia's forces if and when Putin decides to invade again. Thankfully, the US didn't capitulate to that demand. Trump even went as far as to claim that military aid wasn't even discussed in the phone call. That's a direct contradiction to what the Kremlin claims, muddying the waters further. Is Trump telling the truth? Has Putin gone into business for himself by bringing the aid issue to the table after the call? We may never know. What we do know is that practically every European nation was watching and waiting to discover the call's outcome. The UK was one of those nations. One of Ukraine's staunchest supporters, the UK wanted to get the lay of the land before it made any decisions regarding the future of its work with Ukraine. By the time reports emerged about the call, the UK clearly had enough. As soon as it heard about Putin's demands that Ukraine's allies stop sending military aid, it shot a message right back to Russia's leader. No chance. That's according to Bloomberg. On March 19th, it reported that the UK had rejected all demands by Putin for Ukraine's allies to suspend their military aid during the partial ceasefire with Ukraine. So Keir Starmer made the UK's position clear. We will always continue to support Ukraine militarily, Starmer's spokesperson Dave Paris told reporters in London after Trump's call with Putin. That support will apply in all scenarios, including any in which Ukraine and Russia achieve peace. To Starmer, refusing to send aid to Ukraine is tantamount to giving up on the entire country. UK's Prime Minister believes that Putin can't be trusted at his word. He sees Russia's call for the suspension of aid for what it really is, an attempt to weaken Ukraine so Russia has an advantage when hostilities restart. But that only gives us part of the reason why the UK has just said no to Putin. There's another, as The Independent highlighted on March 19th, disappointment. According to the British outlet, Starmer had already expressed his disappointment with what could be best described as Putin's lukewarm response to the initial ceasefire terms negotiated between Trump and Zelenskyy. That version of the 30-day ceasefire would have seen Ukraine and Russia lay down arms across every area of the battlefield. Ground forces would grind to a halt, aerial bombardments would stop, even attacks by and against the Black Sea Fleet, which is stationed in annexed Crimea, would end for 30 days. It would have been a true ceasefire that gave Russia and Ukraine a chance to recharge and potentially come to the table to continue further negotiations. Putin said no to that version of the ceasefire. Though Russia's leader claimed that he agreed with the principle behind the ceasefire, questions still needed to be answered. Speaking at a Moscow press conference, Russia's leader said, "The idea is right and we support it, but there are questions that we need to discuss." Putin also called for an enduring peace and removing the root causes of the crisis. Therein lay the problem for the UK. To the UK and most of Ukraine's Western allies, the root cause of the Ukraine war is simple. Vladimir Putin invaded Ukraine in February 2022. It's all Russia's fault, and it's a war that wouldn't have happened at all if Putin didn't follow through on his expansionist desire. Putin sees his invasion much differently. To him, the root cause of the crisis is Ukraine's existence. Putin feels that Ukraine and Russia shouldn't be separate states. Instead, Ukraine is and always has been part of Russia, even though it's been an independent nation for decades since the fall of the Soviet Union. Russia's leader even claimed that Ukrainians and Russians are one people before he launched his invasion, which is telling. A ceasefire of any kind doesn't mean much when Putin is so concerned about the supposed root causes of the Ukraine issue. He doesn't recognize himself as that cause, and to solve the problem in his mind, there's only one path: dissolve Ukraine into the Russian Federation. That brings us back to the initial ceasefire proposal and UK's immediate reaction. The Independent notes that Starmer felt that Russia's refusal to accept terms was disappointing, and he said that Ukraine would always have the UK's unwavering support. Hours before Putin's phone call with Trump, that was a message to Russia's president. The UK knows what Putin really means when he claims that he wants to solve the root causes of the war. Turkey just blindsided NATO. For years, Turkey played both sides, arming Ukraine while shaking hands with Moscow. But now, it's reportedly ready to send troops into Ukraine. Europe thought it had a plan, a peacekeeping force led by the usual suspects, the UK, France, and Germany, but nobody saw Turkey coming. And NATO, they weren't prepared for this. This bold, risky and unpredictable move could redraw the battlefield and shake Europe's security for years to come. Here's why Turkey's surprise decision has everyone watching and worrying. Let's start with what we know. Sadly, this might disappoint you a little since there's no step-by-step breakdown of Turkey's master plan. No leaked documents, no dramatic battlefield maps, just cryptic statements, behind-the-doors conversations and anonymous sources out of Ankara. And yet plenty has been said, and even more can be read between the lines, and all of it is pretty shocking. So how do we know about Turkey's plans to send troops to Ukraine? Well, it all started in Ankara. By mid-February 2025, Turkish media reported that the country's president, Recep Tayyip Erdogan, had quietly floated the idea of a Turkish troop deployment to both Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy and Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov in separate meetings. On February 18th, Zelenskyy spoke to reporters in Ankara on the topic. His message was clear to those who listened carefully. Peace is only possible if everyone who is really able to provide security guarantees is involved. And in a pointed remark, he added, "Today we discussed the issue with President Erdogan, and I'm grateful to him for his understanding." In other words, Ukraine wants Turkey at the table, not just for diplomacy, but for military backing, and Turkey seems quite open to the idea. Fast forward to March 6th. Suddenly, an anonymous Turkish Defense Ministry source told journalists that Turkey could contribute to a peacekeeping force in Ukraine. But of course nothing was official, a classic diplomatic soft launch. That same day, Admiral Zeki Aktürk, Turkish Defense Ministry press and public relations advisor and spokesperson, repeated the message officially. He said that Turkey would consider sending troops if it was necessary for regional stability and peace, a non-denial if ever there was one. The next day, March 7th, Erdogan made things even clearer. At a European Union-led virtual summit, he declared, "Planning all steps regarding European security together with Turkey will be in our mutual interest." Translation: if Europe is reshaping its security strategy, Turkey demands a say. And what better way to make itself indispensable than by offering troops? By March 11th, the talk was turning into action. Turkey's Chief of General Staff, Metin Gurak, landed in Paris to attend a high-level meeting where troop deployments were explicitly on the agenda. The gathering was historic, 34 military chiefs from NATO, the EU, Japan and Australia. The one country missing? The US. With Trump pulling back, it was clear that Europe and Turkey were trying to fill the power vacuum. That's why Turkish Foreign Minister Hakan Fidan had already attended the 2025 London summit on Ukraine, discussing Turkey's role in a peace deal and, crucially, its place in Europe's new security order. Although not many details about Turkey's involvement have been shared, a few conditions seem to be emerging, emphasis on seem. First, Turkey won't move a muscle unless there's a ceasefire. According to multiple sources, Ankara has made it clear that troops would only be deployed if Ukraine and Russia first agree to stop fighting. Even then, the initial deployment would involve non-combatant units, that is, monitors, not soldiers with guns. This alone makes the whole thing feel far off, if not outright wishful thinking. Another reported condition? Turkey refuses to be sidelined in the planning process. Officials insist that Ankara must be included in all consultations and preparations before committing to anything. In other words, Erdogan doesn't want anyone to boss him around. If this mission happens, Turkey wants a real say in how it's structured. So much so that some speculate Erdogan might ditch the rest of NATO allies and just go in alone, but more on that later. For now, we must answer another big question. Who's footing the bill? Turkey does contribute to UN peacekeeping missions, but on a very small scale. Right now, it has 128 troops in Lebanon and barely a few dozen police officers in other UN operations. Their salaries are paid by Turkey, but the UN reimburses $1,428 per soldier. If Turkey were to send troops to Ukraine, this same system would apply, except there's a slight problem. The UN peacekeeping budget is only $5.6 billion a year. A Ukraine mission would need tens of thousands of troops, maybe even hundreds of thousands. Bruegel, a Belgian think tank, puts the figure at 300,000. Zelenskyy, however, was a bit more modest. He suggested that between 100 and 150,000 European troops would be required to ensure a fragile ceasefire, assuming the US isn't stepping in with solid security guarantees. Benjamin Jensen, a defense analyst from the Center for Strategic and International Studies, argued that the UN's current peacekeeping operations in Lebanon, with just 14,000 personnel, would need to be scaled up to 145,000 troops in Ukraine, given the front lines and the sheer size of the conflict. Whatever figure it ends up being, Turkey could contribute to it significantly. Why? Because we're talking about the second largest army in NATO, just behind the US. But here's the kicker. While Turkey may have the firepower, 355,000 active-duty soldiers to be exact, its economy isn't exactly in top shape to bankroll the kind of military presence Ukraine would need. This brings us back to the same question. Who's paying for all of this? That part is still a giant question mark. Basically, everything about Turkey's role remains up in the air, at least for now. Although Turkey's potential involvement is still wrapped in uncertainty, a number of countries have been much more vocal about their willingness to send troops to Ukraine. The UK and France in particular are pushing hard for a European-led peacekeeping mission. Both have expressed readiness to deploy troops, about 30,000 soldiers, as part of security guarantees in the event of a peace agreement. This comes after months of private discussions and strategic thinking on the matter. The UK's Prime Minister Keir Starmer is also making his pitch to Trump, emphasizing the importance of US support in deterring any potential Russian aggression post-ceasefire. However, this support will likely be in the form of intelligence and logistics, not troops. No, those will come from Europe alone. The UK is hoping to deploy peacekeepers to key Ukrainian locations like cities, ports, and nuclear power plants, avoiding direct conflict zones. The French are similarly on board and have been actively seeking to take the lead in these discussions. French President Emmanuel Macron has made it abundantly clear that France would contribute significantly to a peacekeeping force, as long as it's done under the right conditions and with proper backing. The key here is that France and the UK are united in pushing for a NATO-aligned operation, with both countries hoping to avert any back and forth with Russia. But not everyone in Europe is thrilled with the idea of sending troops. Countries like Spain and Italy have expressed outright opposition or hesitation. Even Germany is somewhat cautious, with Chancellor Olaf Scholz saying the idea is premature, especially when the outcome of peace talks is still anyone's guess. Spain and Italy have shared similar concerns, particularly about the political fallout and the risk of further escalating tensions. The discussions came to a head after the summit in Paris, where European leaders failed to reach a consensus. Even nations like Poland, which typically takes a hard-line stance on Ukraine, hesitated. Sure, Poland wants a bigger army, 500,000 soldiers strong. However, it also wants to avoid a military footprint in Ukraine, fearing it could lead to further confrontation with Russia. Is that what made Turkey's decision so shocking to NATO? Was it the fact that while Europe floundered, Turkey just went for it? Well, not quite. NATO's shock has more to do with the fact that Turkey reportedly didn't bother to wait for approval. According to some reports, the initial idea to send troops wasn't part of a NATO mission, nor was it coordinated through Brussels or Washington. No, it seems this was Turkey acting alone. It's as if Erdogan woke up one day and decided to skip the usual diplomatic red tape and make his own bold move, no matter the fallout. That's why some commentators see Turkey's potential involvement as going against NATO. It's not that NATO members are inherently opposed to the idea of peacekeepers in Ukraine, quite the opposite, but it's the fact that Turkey chose to go rogue, jumping into the fray without the typical NATO consensus. That's what really rattled the alliance. But let's be honest, this is hardly the first time Turkey has raised eyebrows within NATO. For years, Turkey has carved out an independent path, at times even at odds with the very alliance it helped build. The country's stance on various issues, from its ties with Russia to its domestic military actions in Syria and Iraq, has often put it at odds with NATO. Despite its role in peacekeeping and crisis management, Turkey's actions increasingly seem to reflect its own agenda rather than NATO's collective goals. That's why commentators have begun to question Turkey's commitment to NATO. Headlines such as "It's time to reconsider Turkey's NATO membership" and "Turkey is committed to undermining NATO" reflect the growing sentiment that this Eurasian country is no longer the staunch ally it once was. Calls for Turkey's expulsion have surfaced, particularly given Ankara's reluctance to fully back NATO's stance against Russia and its complicated relationship with Moscow. This leads us to another major reason why Turkey's decision has stunned NATO. You see, Turkey is famous, or perhaps infamous, for its delicate balancing act in international diplomacy, particularly when it comes to its stance on the war in Ukraine. Erdogan has been steadfast in declaring that Turkey will not take sides in the conflict. He explicitly told Newsweek some 8 months ago, "We will not be a party to this war," highlighting the country's commitment to maintaining a neutral position. This approach has allowed Turkey to remain an intermediary between Russia and Ukraine, acting as a bridge between the East and West. When it comes to the East, Turkey's relationship with Russia is one of strategic cooperation wrapped in competition. Despite competing interests in various regions, including Syria and the Caucasus, where Turkish and Russian forces sometimes back opposing sides, the two nations maintain a surprisingly stable diplomatic relationship. A Romanian think tank, Global Focus Center, described it the best. Turkey and Russia are, in many ways, enemies with benefits. For example, Turkey military prowess often puts it at odds with Russia, like when a Turkish F-16 shot down a Russian jet in 2015. But the countries continue to engage in high-level talks and collaborate on numerous fronts. Russia provides Turkey with crucial energy supplies, especially natural gas, through pipelines like the 580-mile-long Turk Stream, which ensures Turkey's energy security while reducing Ukraine's role as a transit hub for Russian gas. On the flip side, Russia has also benefited from Turkey's strategic location in the Black Sea and its key role in controlling access to the Mediterranean through the Bosphorus Strait. Despite the occasional political rift, Putin and Erdogan have managed to keep their relationship surprisingly cordial, likely due to an informal agreement between the two leaders to avoid a major conflict. Both know that their rivalry could quickly spiral out of control, and both have far too much at stake to allow it to escalate. Looking toward the West, Turkey has shown significant support for Ukraine, both diplomatically and militarily. Erdogan has consistently championed Ukraine's sovereignty, firmly asserting that Crimea belongs to Kyiv, not Moscow. Turkish drones, most notably the Bayraktar TB2, became iconic symbols of Ukrainian resistance early in the war. And these weren't the only weapons Turkey sold to Ukraine. There were also numerous heavy machine guns, armored vehicles, laser-guided missiles, and electronic warfare systems. In fact, Ukraine was responsible for 5.3% of all Turkish defense exports in 2023, the year these exports hit $5.5 billion. Turkey has also mediated crucial agreements, including the Black Sea Grain Initiative, which allowed Ukraine to export much-needed grain despite the blockade by Russia. Yet Turkey's support is carefully measured. While it has condemned Russia's actions, it's not joined the West in imposing sanctions on Russia. Instead, Turkey has taken on the role of a mediator between the warring sides. Erdogan has used his position to push for peace talks, offering Turkey as the ideal location for negotiations between Russia, Ukraine, and even the US. He has been clear that peace, not victory, is the goal for Turkey, a stance that aligns with its broader strategic interests in the region. But again, it's all about Turkey's interests, not NATO's. That's another reason why the alliance isn't exactly ecstatic about Turkey's troops in Ukraine. A unilateral deployment by Turkey into a conflict zone like Ukraine is a risky move, one that could set NATO back years. Turkey's boldness may appear admirable in terms of military capability, but it carries the risk of accidental escalation, especially if Russia interprets such actions as hostile. And let's not kid ourselves, of course Russia will see them that way. Lavrov has already declared that European countries, whether under the EU umbrella or with their national flags, will not be accepted in Ukraine. Vasily Nebenzia, Russia's UN representative, went a step further, calling any European soldiers sent to Ukraine without a UN resolution a legitimate target. This poorly veiled threat reveals just how dangerous it is for a NATO nation to act alone, especially now. At the moment, Europe needs more unity than ever. In March 2025, European leaders started talking about security in terms of peace through strength, moving away from the traditional US-dominated approach. This was Turkey's chance to fit in, to show it aligned with European goals. Yet for now, it looks like Turkey is still holding its interventionist posture and solo acts tight. Again, this is nothing new for Turkey. From blocking defense plans for Baltic states to flaunting the purchase of the Russian S-400 missile system, Erdogan is no stranger to bidding unity farewell. NATO has even kicked Turkey off the F-35 fighter program over the S-400 deal, a direct consequence of Turkey's defiance. Despite these tensions, Turkey remains NATO's second-largest military force, with a planned budget of approximately $33.7 billion on defense in 2025. But as impressive as this figure is, it's not clear right now whether or not Turkey will indeed meet NATO's 2% threshold. Maybe if the country spent a little less time playing global power games and a little more time budgeting, it will be able to cover its own defense properly. Just a thought. But let's not forget, even that 2% threshold won't be enough to defend Europe from Russia. According to Bruegel, Europe needs at least $272 billion more annually to successfully do so. That's why the European leaders have already discussed increasing defense spending, with France proposing 3% to 3.5% of GDP, way beyond NATO's target of 2%. This all points to a growing shift towards European strategic autonomy, and Turkey's unilateral military moves could potentially derail this effort. In a climate where Europe has been preaching cooperation and a united front, Turkey's independence may cost it politically. But this is far from the only cost Turkey might face. Turkey's bold decision to send troops into Ukraine could blow up in its face in more ways than one. First, let's talk about the military reality. Deploying Turkish troops into an active war zone means navigating unpredictable combat conditions, potential supply chain disruptions, and of course, the constant threat of Russian strikes. Peacekeepers or not, the moment the first bullets fly near them, the Turkish troops are targets, legitimate ones as Nebenzia put it. On the diplomatic front, things get even messier. Turkey's NATO membership means it's bound by Article 5, the clause that promises mutual defense among allies. But if Turkey acts unilaterally outside of NATO's umbrella, who's going to defend Turkish troops if they're attacked by Russia? That seems to be a grey area that no alliance member has ever tested before. Then there's the neutrality challenge. As mentioned, Turkey has long painted itself as a bridge between the East and West, until now. By sending troops into Ukraine, Turkey is officially picking sides, and that means it's no longer the diplomatic go-between. Russia won't forget that, and NATO allies will start wondering if they can trust Turkey to play nice when the chips are down. And this decision isn't just a geopolitical headache for Erdogan. It might tear at the fabric of Turkey's internal politics too. Nationalist voices are cheering, seeing it as proof that Turkey is no longer a middle power, but a regional powerhouse that can stand up to Moscow. But business leaders and economic advisors, they're already sweating bullets. With imports worth roughly $37 billion, Turkey is one of the 3 biggest buyers of Russia's fossil fuels in the world, and this figure only keeps increasing. Push Moscow too far and Erdogan could find himself facing inflation spikes, energy shortages, and a fragile economic recovery in ruins. It's a gamble that could crash the Turkish economy, plain and simple. And Russia could do more than just refuse to sell fossil fuels. In the worst-case scenario, Russia could decide that Turkish peacekeepers aren't neutral at all, they're NATO proxies. That could mean anything from cyber attacks on Turkish infrastructure to direct Russian retaliation on Turkish supply lines. Also, we can't forget the broader European angle either. If Turkey's independent action starts to sideline EU peace plans, it could deepen the rift between Ankara and Brussels. Until recently, Turkey's EU membership talks were frozen, and while the country exported $108.7 billion worth of goods to the Union, diplomatic trust was at an all-time low. If Turkey had pushed further away from Europe, it risked even deeper isolation in an already volatile region. And that isolation could have sent Turkey spiraling into an economic and diplomatic crisis. Simply put, its gamble in Ukraine could either strengthen its position as a crucial security partner or backfire completely. But now, with Europe growing uneasy over US policy shifts, Turkey isn't being reconsidered for EU membership, but it is becoming more valuable as a security player. European leaders see Ankara as a key piece in their push for greater military and strategic independence. The question now is, will Turkey's gamble in Ukraine cement its influence, or is it walking straight into a geopolitical minefield? Well, the country could become the kingmaker in a new global security order, which isn't some far-fetched fantasy. Take Turkey's Black Sea grain deal in 2022 as an example. Turkey, alongside the UN, stepped in and brokered a deal that the US and EU had failed to pull off. The result? It prevented famine for tens of millions of people worldwide, sending nearly 33 million tons of grain to 45 countries. With these figures in mind, it's easy to understand why this deal secured Turkey diplomatic clout no military alliance could buy. This deal proved that Turkey can play in the big leagues. If Turkey succeeds in Ukraine, it could rewrite the playbook for mid-sized powers. Its success would mean that countries outside the traditional superpower club could shape global conflicts directly. If Turkish peacekeepers manage to enforce a ceasefire or stabilize contested zones, Turkey could emerge as the undisputed security guarantor in the Black Sea region. This means that the risks might be high, but the rewards could be monumental. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. Remember, most of this isn't official information, and given how volatile the current political climate is, anything could happen. Just like deciding to act alone, Erdogan could very well wake up tomorrow and pretend he never even considered sending troops to Ukraine. So while it's easy to get swept up in the drama, let's keep in mind that one tweet or press conference could flip the entire script. So for now, all we can do is speculate, and we invite you to do that as well. Let us know whether you think Turkey has overplayed its hand, or whether the country could bring the bold leadership the world desperately needs. Also, will Turkey pull off a solo act? Or will its peacekeepers be part of an official UN mission? And finally, how will the major parties involved answer to either scenario? Drop your thoughts in the comments below.